They were laughing at my ship before I had finished signing for the docking fee. Not quiet laughter either. Uvain laughter is a ripple that runs up the neck frills and ends in a sound like wind chimes falling down a stairwell, and there were 11 of them doing it at once, which meant the whole east hangar of Cantilever Reach sounded like a music store in an earthquake. I kept signing. The dock clerk, a small Uvain with frills the color of old dishwater, had the decency to look embarrassed on their behalf. "That," said a voice above me in the high trade dialect they use when they want the whole room to hear, "cannot possibly be the human bid." I looked up, and then up some more. The Uvan run tall as a species, but the one standing over my paperwork was tall even for them. 3 meters of pearl gray elegance wrapped in a flight robe that probably cost more than my ship. His neck banners hung from a little mast fitted between his shoulders. 10 of them, silk thin, each one stamped with a guild seal. I'd been hauling freight through Uvain space for 30 years. I knew what 10 banners meant. You didn't see 10 banners in person. You saw 10 banners on the recruiting posters. "Sailmaster Veorenthal," the dock clerk whispered to me, the way you'd whisper a storm warning. "Morning," I said, and went back to the form. Orenthal turned, slow and theatrical, and looked out the hangar viewport at my ship. I'll grant the view wasn't flattering. The Junebug is an orbital tug, 41 years old. 22 meters of welded plate, the approximate shape of a brick that lost a fight. Her hull carries more patches than original skin. There's a scorch fan across her bow that never buffed out, a tow saddle on her spine worn shiny as a saddle should be, and a cracked running light I'd been meaning to get to since the spring before last. Parked between 2 Uvan couriers, and Uvan couriers are grown, not built, all pearl curves and not a seam on them, she looked like a work boot in a jewelry case. "It has," Orenthal said, and his frills shivered with delight. "A windscreen wiper." That set the 11 of them off again. Chimes down the stairwell. A few of the dock crews drifted over to see, because nothing draws a crowd like a crowd, and within a minute there were maybe 40 Uvain looking through the viewport at my wiper. For the record, it's a dust wiper. It's rated for vacuum, and it has saved my life 4 times. I didn't say that. 30 years out here teaches you that explaining yourself to a man mid-law is watering a weed. The clerk cleared their throat apologetically. "Your bid is registered, Captain Harker, Lot 14. The Meridian Loop contract is called in 1 hour. Appreciated," I said. "The Meridian Loop," Orenthal repeated, tasting it. He came around the desk so he could look down at me properly. Up close, his eyes were beautiful, I'll admit, long and silver, like rain on a window. "The supply circuit through the Morel Drift. 12 settlements, 14 runs a season, medical priority cargo. The contract my guild has held for 9 years. That Meridian Loop. That's the one. And you intend to fly it in that." A long gray finger unfolded toward the Junebug. "She's paid off," I said. It wasn't a joke, but it got the biggest laugh of the morning. Uvan don't carry debt. Their guilds own everything down to the robes, so the concept of paying off a ship struck them somewhere between quaint and barbaric. Orenthal's frills went almost flat with pleasure. He turned to his wing of pilots, all banners and silk, and said something in low harbor cant that I wasn't supposed to catch. I caught it anyway. 30 years. The polite translation was that the humans had sent a scrap heap with a man inside it. Here's the thing I want on the record before any of the rest of it. I didn't come to Cantilever Reach to race anybody. I came because the Meridian Loop tender had gone public for the first time in 9 years, because I knew the drift better than any pilot alive or grown, and because 12 settlements on that loop had spent 2 winters getting their insulin and their mail 4 weeks late whenever the weather got interesting. The Corian Spire Guild flew the loop in fair seasons and declared force majeure in foul ones. I'd read the delivery logs. Everyone on the loop had read the delivery logs. That's why the tender went public. So I had an hour to kill and a bid on the table, and I went and got a coffee from the thermos in my cab, because Cantilever Reach sells 40 kinds of mist infusion and nothing a working man would call a drink. The auction hall was a cathedral of a place, all white vault and banner masts, and Lot 14 came up with the ceremony of a funeral for someone important. The harbor mistress, an old Uvan named Ulaine, frills gone stiff and silver with age, read the terms off a scroll that was genuinely physically a scroll. 14 runs a season, medical priority, penalty clauses for late delivery that would make a banker sweat. 2 bids registered, the Corian Spire Guild incumbent, and 1D Harker, sole trader, vessel Junebug, human registry. The hall found that very funny. I was getting used to the chimes by then. Orenthal rose from the guild benches like a mast going up. "Harbor mistress," he said, "the guild does not protest the human bid. The guild welcomes it." A ripple of frills. "But the Meridian Loop is a trust. Lives sit on it. Surely the bid requires the bidder to demonstrate a vessel." And here he let the pause do its work, equal to the root. "The tender requires a capability trial at the assessor's discretion," Elaine said. Her voice had the dry rasp old Uvain get, like paper sliding on paper. What does the sailmaster propose? A proving run. Orenthal spread his long hands, all reason and grace. The throat of the Morel drift, from the reach to Pelin Gate. The route the contract itself must fly. The guild will fly it as well, as a courtesy, a pace-setter, so the assessors may compare a vessel of the line against. The pause again. He was a craftsman. The human entry. First hull through the gate carries the lot. It took me a second to understand what he'd just done. And I want to be fair to him. It was elegant. He'd turned a contract tender into a match race, in public, in front of the assessors and half the harbor, with the guild's champion flying the guild's flagship against a tug older than most of his pilots. It wasn't enough for the guild to keep the contract. The human bid had to be made into a story they'd tell at banquets. Every silver eye in that hall came around to me. The harbor mistress' scroll crackled in the quiet. "Captain Harker," she said, "the trial is at my discretion. You may decline it and submit to standard assessment. Documents, inspection, the usual course. The guild's proposal is," she chose the word carefully, "theatrical. Standard assessment meant 6 weeks of Uvain paperwork reviewed by Uvain assessors who banked with the Uvain guild. I'd flown that route too. "What's the weather doing in the throat this week?" I asked. A junior assessor checked. "The drift bulletin reports a Class 4 silica bloom moving through the Narrows. Sheer activity at the Comet line. Conditions are poor," the hall murmured. Orenthal's frills lifted a fraction, and I understood that too. He'd known the weather before he proposed the run. In a Class 4 bloom, the smart money said the human scrap heap wouldn't even finish, and a no finish wasn't a loss, it was a comedy. They'd tow my story around for a decade. "Fine by me," I said. "I was flying out tonight anyway. Saves me a trip." I'm told the silence that followed read better than it felt. What I felt was my coffee going cold. Orenthal looked at me for a long moment, the way you'd look at a dog that had just done arithmetic, entertained but also faintly insulted that the universe allowed it. "Captain," he said, "I admire courage in small vessels. I will make it sporting. If your tug reaches Pelin Gate within a full watch of my lance, within 10 hours of my crossing, Captain, I will withdraw the guild's bid entirely and stand at the gate to haul down my own banner." A guild pilot near him actually gasped. Banners again. I'd learned just how much that offer cost before this was over. But even then I knew it wasn't generosity. It was a man buying the biggest possible audience for somebody else's embarrassment. "And if I'm slower than that," I asked, "then the loop is ours. The assessors are satisfied, and you will sell me that wiper," Orenthal said, "as a souvenir." Chimes, chimes, chimes all the way up to the White Vault. The harbor mistress struck the dace with the flat of her hand before the laughter died on its own, which old Ulaine, I'd learned, never liked to let happen for Orenthal. "The trial's accepted and entered," she said. "Departure at second bell tomorrow. Assessor buoys will hold the racing line and log all telemetry. Captains, the throat in a Class 4 bloom is no theater. The Reach will mourn neither of you." "The Reach will not need to," Orenthal said, and bowed to the hall, banners swinging, and the hall sang for him. I went back to my ship. Behind me the betting started before I'd cleared the doors. I heard the odds caller open the book at 60-1, and I heard the laugh that went up when somebody, loudly in harbor cant, put a single coin on the scrap heap. I found out later it was the dock clerk. Dishwater frills. I owe that little Yvonne a drink to this day. Down in the east hangar, the crowd at the viewport had grown. They'd brought juveniles. Young Uvan, frills still soft, lifted up to see the funny human ship. A docent from the Harbor Academy was using the June bug as a teaching exhibit, and her voice carried. "Observe the welded seams, the asymmetric patching, the externally mounted manipulator, yes, the little arm. We believe it is original to the vessel. The abrasion shielding applied remarkably by hand." I let myself through the crowd, popped the cab hatch, and climbed up. 40 silver eyes tracked me like I was the last act of the matinee. The docent, game as anything, raised her voice. "Captain, for the cohort, how old is the vessel, please?" 41 years, I said, a soft scandalized ripple. "Uvain hulls are regrown every 9. "And how many of those years?" she asked gently, like she was offering me a way out. "Has it been in this condition?" I looked at the June bug's bow, at the scorch fan and the patchwork and the wiper sitting on the screen like an honest tool, and I gave the only answer there's ever been. "All of them," I said, and went inside to check the weather. The weather was worse than the bulletin said. It usually is. Bulletins are written by instruments parked in the calm spots, because instruments parked in the rough spots stop being instruments. I pulled the raw feed off the survey net instead. I hold a charting commission for the Morel Drift with the Colonial Survey Office, which is the part of my livelihood nobody at Cantilever Reach had bothered to look up, and I spent an hour reading the drift the way you'd read a river. Here's what the drift is, for those who've only seen it on a chart. A long time ago, longer than anyone's history, 2 icy moons met each other at a bad angle. What's left is a belt of debris, dust, and grumbling comet fragments about 9 light hours long, strung across the only economical corridor between the Reach and the Pellin settlements. Most of the year it's just ugly. But the fragments still carry volatiles, and when the orbital season swings them sunward they vent, and the venting drives silica dust into blooms, storms, in any language that matters, and the storms pile up against the gravity shears where the old moon's masses still argue with each other. The throat is the channel through the worst of it. 60 hours of flying if the weather's kind. The weather was not going to be kind. A Class 4 bloom was coming through the narrows like silt through a funnel, and behind it, on the survey feed, I could see the comet line lighting up, 4 big fragments venting in sequence, which meant the shears would be running high and the back half of the throat would be a washing machine. I marked 3 places where a sane pilot could get killed and 1 place where an impatient one definitely would. Then I made dinner, because worry is not a meal. I was halfway through it when somebody knocked on my hull, politely, with a tool, not a fist. The Uvain standing under my cab was old, not harbor mistress old, but past whatever passes for their middle years, wearing dock leathers gone soft, at the joints with a single banner on his shoulder mast, and the banner was plain gray, no seal. I'd worked Uvan harbors 3 decades, and I'd learned the grammar even if no one teaches it to outsiders. Banners are wind names. Wind names are rank, and a plain gray banner means still air. It means the guilds passed you over and never came back. He carried a fitting in one hand, a coil saddle bearing, the kind my portside tow winch takes. Your winch, he said in plain trade, not the high dialect. I heard it on your approach this morning. The port bearing sings flat. It does, I said. Been singing flat since Tully's Hope. I rebuilt the same pattern for 9 years, he said. Salvage tugs, before the guild retired the class. May I? His name was Hen. He didn't give the rest of it, and I knew enough not to ask a still air man for his wind name. We pulled the bearing together under the work lamps, while the hangar crowd thinned, and he handled my 41-year-old winch like a man shaking hands with an old colleague. At some point I noticed him reading the scorch fan on the bow, tracing the spread of it with his eyes, and I watched him understand what it was. Not one bad day, but a few hundred ordinary ones. Dust scour, bloom after bloom after bloom. The drift's signature written in the only handwriting it has. You've flown the throat in season, he said. Not a question. Every season for 30 years. It's my loop. I just never held the paper on it. Hen was quiet for a while, fitting the new bearing, and the work lamps hummed. The Lance of the 10th Wind is the finest hull this harbor has ever grown, he said at last. She has never lost a proving run. The sailmaster has never lost anything. He torqued the housing down, even in unhurried. And neither of them has ever been in weather, Captain. The guild flies the loop in the calm months and files force majeure in the blooms. The young ones think that is what the words mean, that when the drift is impassable, you do not pass. 9 years, and no hull of the line has seen a Class 4 from the inside. And you're telling me this because? He stood up off his knees the way old riggers everywhere stand up, in installments. Because 12 settlements get their medicine 4 weeks late when the words mean that, Hen said. And because I put a coin on you, and I would like it understood that I am not a fool with money. 2 coins on the scrap heap then. The odds had drifted out to 80-1 by supper time. I told him the winch had never sounded better, which was true, and he went off down the hangar with his gray banner swinging, and that was the whole conversation. It was also, though neither of us said it, the only honest inspection my ship got at Cantilever Reach, because the official one happened the next morning, an hour before second bell, and it was a carnival. The guild sent a delegation of 6, robes and styluses, trailed by a harbor camera crew feeding the public channels, because by morning the proving run had become the only story on the Reach. They went over the June bug at arm's length, the way you'd inspect something that might be sticky. They found the manual breaker panel and asked, for the cameras, why my electrical system was operated by levers. They found the spare hull patches racked in the airlock, pre-cut plate, gasket rolls, the sealant gun, and asked, delighted, whether the vessel was expected to disassemble en route. They found my acceleration couch with the cracked vinyl and the wool blanket my sister knitted, and the lead assessor held the corner of that blanket up between 2 fingers like the tail of a dead animal, and the cameras came in close, and somewhere out on the public channels, several million Uvan learned the human word blanky. I have since been told it remained in their trade slang. There are worse legacies. They found the coffee thermos clipped to the console and asked what fluid system it served. Pilot, I said. Nobody wrote it down. And they found the cab's forward screen, and the wiper, and the lead assessor stood in front of it for a long moment, stylus folded, and asked the question they'd all been building to. Why does a vacuum vessel carry a windscreen wiper? Because the windscreen gets dirty, I said. I watched the answer fail to land anywhere. 6 assessors, and not one of them had ever flown through anything. Their hulls lived in clean vacuum and grew new skins every 9 years. Dust was a thing that happened to cargo manifests, a number that closed routes. The idea that a pilot might fly into the dirt on purpose repeatedly for decades and would therefore need to see, it didn't fit anywhere they kept their ideas. The lead assessor wrote down non-standard moisture apparatus, and the delegation moved on, satisfied, to mock my tires. Orenthal himself came at the end, robes traded for a flight suit that fit him like weather fits a mountain, and he came alone, and he didn't laugh at anything. Up close, with no audience to play, he was a different and better man. They usually are. Captain Harker. He looked over the Junebug slowly, bowed astern, and his frills stayed level. My harbor has had its entertainment at your expense. You bore it well. So I will offer you, between captains, a graceful door. Withdraw tonight. Cite the weather. No one will doubt it. The bulletin worsens by the hour. The guild will subcontract you 4 runs a season on the loop, fair rates, your own schedule. You keep your livelihood. I keep my banner. The settlements get their medicine. Everyone is warm. I'll say this for him. It was a real offer, and a generous one, and 11 men out of 10 would have taken it. You'd fly the calm runs and hand me the blooms, I said. I would hand you the runs you are suited to. Those are the ones with the insulin in them, Sailmaster. His frills moved then, just a little, the first honest thing they'd done in my presence. He looked at the scorch fan on my bow for a while. I let him. You believe you will beat the lance, he said. There was no mockery in it at all. There was something underneath that I recognized but couldn't name yet, and it took me until the middle of the throat to name it, so I'll leave it where I found it. I believe the drift doesn't care what your hull cost, I said. Tomorrow it gets a vote. He stood another moment, then made the small windbow they give equals, which I don't think he noticed himself doing, and walked back down the hangar through the camera lights, and the channels got their headline shot, and the odds caller, I checked, nudged the book into 50-1. Somebody with silver eyes had blinked. Second bell on departure morning sounded like a festival. They'd opened the public galleries over the east hangar, and the reach being the reach, there were food stalls. The lance of the 10th wind came out of her grown berth under tow, and I will not pretend she wasn't the most beautiful thing I ever saw fly. 60 meters of pearl, no seam, no patch, no scar, hull flowing like poured cream, 10 banners streaming from her dorsal mast in the hangar's air. The galleries sang her out. They have a departure song for hulls of the line, and 4,000 Uvans singing it will raise the hair on your arms whether you're invited or not. The Junebug went out second on her own engines, because tugs don't get towed, and the galleries laughed her down the rail, good-natured by then, almost fond, the way a crowd laughs at the mule in a parade. I sat in my cracked couch with my sister's blanket folded behind my head, ran the checklist my father wrote half of, and put my hand on the throttle quadrant where 41 years of hands had worn the anodizing through. All right, old girl, I said, working day. The marshal buoy gave us the line. The throat, entry to Pelham Gate, no lane restrictions. Telemetry logged, first hull through, carries the lot. On the common channel, the harbor caller was reading the odds out loud for the galleries, and the last thing I heard from Cantilever Reach before the start tone was 4,000 people laughing at the answer. Then the tone, and the lance lit her drives and left me like the harbor was on fire. I want to be honest about the first 9 hours, because the harbor channels certainly were. The lance flew away from me like I was anchored. In clean vacuum, she pulled 4 lengths of acceleration to my one, and the gap on the assessor plot went from embarrassing to comical to a kind of abstract mathematics. By hour 3, she was 250,000 kilometers ahead. By hour 6, the harbor caller had stopped giving the gap in distance and started giving it in jokes. The human entry has just passed the start buoy. Afterglow, that kind of thing. The galleries back at the Reach were still full. People had brought lunches. I flew my own plan. Steady boost, 2 notches under maximum. The reactor warm but never breathing hard, and I spent the hours doing what a drift pilot does at the top of a run. Reading. The survey feed, the assessor buoy's weather snaps, the light coming off the comet line. I drank my coffee. I did the crossword I keep clipped to the yoke for the boring legs, because there is no point spending nerves on a stretch of road that doesn't want them. The throat opens at a marker everyone calls the door, where the clean corridor bends into the debris belt, and the first dust shows up like smoke under a door at a house fire. The lance reached it at hour 9 with a lead of just under 400,000 kilometers, and the harbor caller's voice had gone from amused to soaring, because at that pace, the proving run would be over in 2 days, and the story would write itself. And then the lance did the thing I'd marked on my chart the night before, at the place where I'd written impatient pilots die here. She hit the door at full racing boost. You can do that in a Class 2 or a sleepy Class 3. The dust at the boundary is thin, your shields shrug it off, and you carry your speed deep before the weather notices you. Every pilot does it once, early, when there's somebody's prodigy and the drift has been polite to them so far. In a Class 4 bloom, the boundary isn't thin dust. The bloom piles up against the door's gravity gradient like snow against a fence, and what looks like the same old smoke is silica at 40 times the density, moving in sheets, with grain sizes that don't sand your hull so much as shot blast it. I watched her telemetry on the assessor feed. The trial was flown on open. Instruments, all data public, which the guild had insisted on for the comedy and which was about to stop being funny. The Lance's velocity into the door was racing velocity. Her shield draw jumped 400% in a minute and a half. Then her forward sensor suite started dropping channels, 1, then 3, then 9, the way they do when the scour gets into the apertures. Those beautiful grown hulls carry their eyes flush to the skin, seamless, perfect, and completely unshuttered, because why would a hull of the line ever need to close its eyes? She slowed. Of course she slowed. Orenthal was arrogant, not stupid. He came down off racing boost, restructured his shields, fell back on his dorsal sensors, and felt his way deeper at half pace while his forward eyes were dying one aperture at a time. His lead was still gigantic, but on my plot, for the first time since the start tone, the line that showed the gap bent the other way. I hit the door at hour 11 at 1/3 boost nose up, shields angled like a roof against the grain sheets, shutters down over every aperture except the 2 hardened ones, flying on instruments that were built, riveted, bolted, not grown, for exactly this dirt. The bloom closed over the June bug like fog over a fishing boat. The wiper came on. First stroke smeared, second stroke clean, the same as it's done since before I owned her. There you are, I said to the storm, and somewhere 250,000 kilometers ahead of me, a champion was learning the first verse of a song every tug pilot knows by heart. The drift doesn't care. I want to explain what flying weather actually is, because the harbor channels that week kept calling it bravery, and bravery is the wrong word. Bravery is what you need when you don't know what's coming. Weather flying is the opposite. It's 30 years of knowing what's coming. Dust isn't uniform. It moves in cells and sheets and rivers. It has lee sides and windward sides. It packs against shears and thins behind fragments. And a man who has flown a few hundred blooms stops seeing chaos and starts seeing terrain. There's a ridge of clean flow that sets up behind the comet line's 3rd fragment in every sunward season, and it isn't on any chart, because I wrote the charts, and I keep that ridge for working days. There's a sheer eddy off the Narrow's north wall that will hand you 200 meters a second for free if you enter it at the right angle, and will hand you to your insurance company if you enter at the wrong one. The throat is a road. It's just a road that kills tourists, so I rode my ridge. Hour 14, hour 18, hour 22, 1/3 boost rising to 1/2 as the grain thinned in the lee, the June bug rocked steady on her old gyros, and the gap on the assessor plot kept bending. 300,000, 260, 210. The Lance was flying the chartered lane down the middle of the throat, the official line, the one the guild's own route books prescribed, dead center of the channel where the dust runs thickest, because the chartered lane was surveyed in the calm season. Orenthal flew it perfectly. That was the heartbreak of watching his telemetry. Every input crisp, every correction textbook. He was flying the finest fair weather line ever flown. In the wrong weather, because no one in 9 banners worth of proving runs had ever taught him there was another kind. At hour 26, the harbor caller stopped doing jokes. I heard it happen because I kept the common channel on low for company. The reach galleries had thinned overnight, but the feed stayed up, and the caller had been coasting on the gap for a day. And then the overnight plot went up on the gallery boards, and you could hear it in his voice the moment somebody backstage showed him the trend line. The human entry, he said, and then nothing for a second or two, and then, in a different register entirely, the human entry is gaining. 200,000 kilometers is still a continent of a lead. But trend lines are merciless little things. Some clerk on the reach with more numbers than tact extended both curves and posted the intersection point, and the intersection point sat square inside the Narrows, 2/3 of the way down the throat, the worst water on the whole road. The odds book, I learned afterward, came in from 50-1 to 20-1 in 4 hours. The dock clerk and old hen were sitting on the best investment at Cantilever Reach, and I hope they dined on it. Hour 30, the bloom's main body arrived, and the middle of the throat turned the color of wet cement. I want to be fair to the Lance of the 10th Wind here, because she was a magnificent ship and none of what happened was her fault. Grown hulls are stronger than welded ones, point for point. Her shields were a generation past anything I carried, and Orenthal, blind in the bow and 1,000 lengths out of his depth, flew her through the arriving wall with a steadiness that made me sit up and pay attention. He'd stopped flying like a champion sometime in the night. He was flying like a student now, feeling, correcting, learning at a rate that frankly alarmed me, because the back half of the throat was going to be decided by who learned fastest, and the man had never been taught, and was catching up anyway. But his ship was hurting. The open telemetry didn't blink, shield draw pinned high, forward apertures 70% dark, intake temperatures wandering upward in a slow, ugly drift that any tug pilot would recognize from across a room. Those flush, seamless intakes that made her flanks so beautiful were breathing silica with every kilometer, and grown hulls don't have filter racks a man can pull and bang clean against a strut. Why would they? Hulls of the line don't eat dirt. The Junebug ate dirt for a living. At hour 33, I parked her in the lee of a fragment the size of a stadium, suited up, pulled both intake racks, banged them clean against the tow saddle the way God and the manufacturer intended, swapped the port filter for the spare, and was back on my ridge in 40 minutes with clean lungs and a fresh thermos. The assessor buoy logged the stop for all to see. The harbor caller announced that the human entry had pulled over, possibly to rest. Possibly to rest, I said to the empty cab, and the Junebug and I went back to work. By hour 40, the gap was 90,000 kilometers, and the Narrows were standing up over the horizon of my plot like a line of bad teeth, and the common channel out of Cantilever Reach had gone very, very quiet. 4,000 people watching two curves close on each other over the worst stretch of road in the sector. Somewhere in that quiet, a guild was starting to do arithmetic it had never done before, and I'd have felt sorry for them if I'd had the spare attention. I didn't. The Narrows don't leave you any. The approach to the Narrows runs past a string of guild relay buoys, the navigation chain that every freighter, settler ferry, and medical runner on the Meridian Loop steers by when the weather's up. 11 of them, spaced down the channel like streetlights on a country road. The bloom had been chewing on them for a week. At hour 42, buoy 7 came up on my plot squawking the wrong position. Not dead, worse than dead. A dead buoy drops off the chain and everyone knows to distrust the gap. Buoy 7 had been knocked loose from its station keeping by a fragment, strike, and was drifting, still transmitting, still confidently telling anyone who asked that it was somewhere it wasn't, with its position error growing by the hour. In clean weather, that's an annoyance. In a bloom, when ships are flying blind on instruments and trusting the chain because their own eyes are scoured dark, a lying buoy is how you lose a settler ferry with 40 families aboard. It's happened. I was on the search grid in 61, and we didn't find enough to bury. The Lance had passed it 6 hours earlier without a twitch. I'm not going to hang that on Orenthal. His forward sensors were mostly gone, his board was a Christmas tree of warnings, and the chartered lanes rules say buoy faults get reported to harbor maintenance, who file a work order, who dispatch a tender in season. He was racing, he reported it. By the book, he did everything right, and by the book, buoy 7 would lie to the channel for 6 more weeks until the season turned. I looked at my plot, 91,000 kilometers of gap, 2 curves bending toward each other, the most important contract of my life sitting on the intersection, and a streetlight knocked crooked over road my settlements fly all winter. This is the part the harbor channels never understood, no matter how many times they replayed it. They called it a gambit afterward, a piece of cold racing psychology. It wasn't anything of the kind. It's just the law of the road. I've never met a tug pilot, a fishing captain, or a lineman who needed it explained, and I've never managed to explain it to anyone else. The chain matters more than you do. You fix the light. You fix it because the next hull through the dark is going to bet 40 lives on it, and because if you were the one drifting and lying, you'd want fixing too. I matched velocity with buoy 7 at hour 43, walked the Junebug's manipulator arm out, the little arm original to the vessel, that the academy docent had been so amused by, caught the buoy's lifting lug on the second pass, hauled it back to station, and pinned it with a fresh anchor charge out of my own stores. Then I sat there for 4 minutes, confirming its broadcast against my survey fix until I was sure the chain was telling the truth again. 51 minutes, hatch to hatch. The assessor buoy logged all of it. On the common channel, the harbor caller reported that the human entry had stopped. Again, and there was audible laughter in the galleries, and then there wasn't, because somebody backstage finally pulled the maintenance log and read it on the air. The laughter stopping was a sound all its own. I've thought about it since. 4,000 people working out in the same few seconds, that the funny little ship had paused a race it was winning to fix their streetlight. Old Hen told me afterward that the odds book didn't move on that one. Nobody rebet. The Reach just went quiet for a while, he said, the way a harbor goes quiet when a story stops being a story and starts being something that happened to people. Then it moved a great deal. Orenthal called me an hour later. Ship to ship, private channel, the first words he'd spoken to me since the hangar. Captain Harker. The silk was gone from his voice. What was left was flat and tired and oddly young. Confirm something for my log. The buoy. You held the gap at 90,000, and you spent an hour of it on harbor maintenance. Boys on station and verified, I said. You can steer the chain through the narrows, saves your dorsal array some work. A long carrier hiss. The storm sang in it. My guild has flown this loop for 9 years, he said, and I have just been taught the rules of my own road by the man I am racing for it. Another hiss, longer. I find I do not enjoy the lesson, Captain. Nobody does the first time, I said. Drink some water. Eat something. The narrows don't forgive tired. He signed off without answering, and then, because the man was a champion in the marrow, and champions are what they are, he took my hour of maintenance, and he spent it like a knife fighter. He'd been learning the weather all night, and in the run-up to the narrows, he finally found a piece of it himself, a thinning behind a venting. Fragment a lee, my kind of country, and he put the lance into it and rode it hard, and the gap jumped back out to 120 before I'd finished my own approach line. On the common channel, the caller found his voice again, and the galleries found theirs. I sat in my cab, listening to 4,000 people sing the Lance's pace song into the dark, and I'll tell you what I told the accident board later. My honest professional reaction was admiration, followed at about 2 seconds distance by a cold feeling in my stomach, because the lee he'd found ran out at the mouth of the narrows, and he was carrying lee speed into the worst water in the sector, blind in the bow, on the strength of 9 hours of weathercraft. 30 years, I keep saying. Here's what 30 years actually buys you. It's not reflexes. Mine were never special, and they're 61 years old now. It's that the drift has shown you all its tricks at least once on somebody else. And so when you see a pilot carrying too much speed toward the narrows north wall in a Class 4, you do not have to wait to find out what happens. You have already stood on the search grid. You already know. I got on the channel. Open hail, no pride, plain trade. Lance of the 10th wind, Junebug. Sailmaster, dump your speed before the mouth. The north wall eddy reverses in heavy bloom. What hands you 200 meters a second in? Fair weather will put you into the wall in this. It is not on the charts. I wrote the charts. Dump your speed, the carrier hissed. The galleries, listening to an open hail, hissed with it. Junebug, Lance. Courteous, level, dead certain. The voice off the recruiting posters. Your concern is logged, Captain. I have flown the eddy's numbers from your own survey publications. The margin is thin, but it holds. The guild thanks you for the road rules, and there was no mockery in it, which somehow made it worse. But I came to race you through the narrows, not to follow you through them. Lance out. I want this part exactly right, because it's the part I'd take back. He wasn't wrong about my survey publications. The published eddy numbers held at his velocity. The reason the published numbers held is that the Colonial Survey publishes calm season figures with bloom corrections in an appendix, and the appendix assumes Class 3, because in all the years of the survey, nobody had ever flown the North Wall in a 4 and come home with data. The number he needed didn't exist anywhere except behind my eyes, and I just failed to put it into words that could outrun a champion's whole life. I did the only thing left. I stopped flying my race and started flying his. I came off my ridge, took the inside line toward the north wall, the line I'd have taken anyway, but I took it hot now, hotter than I'd flown in a decade, the Junebug's old frame drumming like a freight bridge, and I closed the gap with everything the working day had left in her, because the arithmetic in my head had stopped being about contracts entirely. It had become the other arithmetic, the kind from 61. How far away will I be when it happens? The answer was 11,000 kilometers. At hour 52, the Lance of the 10th wind entered the mouth of the narrows carrying lee speed, flew her numbers flawlessly into an eddy that wasn't running her numbers, and the north wall reached out and took her. It wasn't a collision. I want that understood because the harbor channels ran the word crash for a week, and a crash is a mercy by comparison. A crash is over quickly. What the eddy did was worse and slower. It took her by the bow the way reversed flow does, and it swapped her clean racing trim for a flat spin in about 4 seconds, and then it fed her sideways into the gravel field that the bloom had packed along the wall's shear line. 60 meters of seamless pearl went through 100 kilometers of flying gravel broadside at speed. Her shields ate the first of it and died doing it. The telemetry, still open, still public. 4,000 people at the reach watching the numbers in real time showed the cascade the way instruments always show a catastrophe, politely. Shield generators offline, forward apertures dark, both main intakes fouled past breathing, those beautiful flush flanks packed solid with silica and gravel at ramming pressure. Then the line that mattered most, the one I was watching when it happened. Main drive, emergency shutdown. A grown hull's drive chokes itself rather than detonate, which is wise of it, and which also meant that the Lance of the 10th wind came out the back of the gravel field with no shields, no forward eyes, no intakes, no thrust, tumbling slowly, end over end like a thrown banner, on a drift line that the whole channel could extend with a schoolchild's arithmetic. The drift line went into the shear wall. Time to wall, a hair over 5 hours. The shear wall is the narrow southern boundary. the place where the old moon's masses still argue. It is not rock. It would be survivable if it were rock. You can land on rock. It's a standing gravity gradient that runs differential forces across anything that enters it. A few hundred gravities of disagreement over a ship's length, and what comes out the far side is filings. Nothing has ever come out the far side. That is not a figure of speech. It is the Colonial Survey's official phrasing, and I am the one who phrased it. Orenthal was alive. His cab was intact, his dorsal array still saw. His voice when he made his report to the assessor buoy was the steadiest thing on the channel. Velocity, drift line, systems lost, time to wall, all of it crisp, all of it correct. A champion giving the cleanest accident report you will ever hear, and refusing in the same breath to attach a distress flag to it. You have to know the Uvanne to understand the next part. A distress call for a hull of the line isn't embarrassing the way it would be for one of ours. It's structural. The wind names, the banners, the songs. The whole tower of it stands on the doctrine that a hull of the line is sufficient, that the guild does not need. And a sailmaster who flags distress doesn't just lose face. He cracks the doctrine for every banner in the harbor. So Orenthal reported his situation in perfect detail, named his time to wall, thanked the assessors for an honorable trial, and declared his intention, I am quoting the public record, to attempt drive restart for as long as attempting remains possible. Form. Faultless form all the way into the wall. The Reach didn't see it that way, not all of it. The harbor mistress's emergency channel lit before he'd finished talking. The guild's standby tender was 4 days out at best speed. They keep it at the calm seas in anchorage, because of course they do. There was exactly one hull in the Mirel Drift inside the 5 hours, and everyone on both sides of the gap had already done the arithmetic. And the channel went quiet in that particular way I was getting to know. 4,000 people turning their heads at once to look at the funny little ship. For the record, because I am asked this at every settlement banquet and twice by the accident board, there was no decision. People want there to have been a decision, a moment in the cab, the contract in one hand and the man in the other, the camera pushing in. I understand why they want it. But you have heard everything I have to say about streetlights and the law of the road, and a law you only keep when it's cheap isn't a law, it's a hobby. The June bug was around and braking toward an intercept solution before the harbor mistress finished asking the channel her question, and the honest record of my deciding is the assessor log, which shows my turn beginning 11 seconds after the Lance's drive flag shutdown, which is about how long it takes a 61-year-old man to put down a thermos and bring a tug-about. Junebug to reach control, I said. I have the intercept. Tell the sailmaster to secure for tow and quit playing with his drive. Restart on fouled intakes will burn what's left of her. A pause, and then old Elaine herself, rasp and all, on the emergency channel, reach control confirms. Captain, the trial is going to finish late, I said. Junebug out. 5 hours sounds like time. It isn't, and I'll walk you through why. The Lance was tumbling 3 degrees a second, end over end, which doesn't sound like much until you remember she was 60 meters long, which made her extremities a moving target swinging through a circle the size of a hangar at walking pace, with mass behind it that would swat the Junebug like a fly if I got the approach wrong by a ship length. She was inside the bloom's worst density and falling toward the sheer, which meant every hour of approach was an hour of scour on my own shields and an hour of the wall's gradient starting to pluck at my trim, and a tow isn't a catch. Any fool can match velocity with a tumbling hull. The job is to take 60 meters of dead pearl out of a 3-degree tumble, marry her mast to yours through a cable and a saddle, and then haul the marriage out of a gravity gradient sideways through weather, without snapping the cable, the saddle, the tug, or the man. This is what the Junebug was for. I don't mean the class of work, I mean her, personally. She'd done 1,100 salvage tows before I ever owned her, and her log goes back to harbor disasters that are in Uvanne history books under other names. Every patch the Academy docent had read out loud to the juveniles was a tow that went hard. The scorch fan was a fuel barge in 49. The dent the cameras loved, port quarter, was the grain hauler off Tully's Hope, the one that came out of the spin wrong and kissed her. The wiper, the famous wiper, had been fitted by the previous owner after the Anselm Reef job, where he'd spent 6 hours doing exactly what I was about to do, blind, scraping his screen by hand at every hold point. You can laugh at a work boot in a jewelry case, but you are going to want the boot on the day the jewelry falls in the harbor, and the whole Mirel Drift was about to watch why. I came up on the Lance at hour 56 through dust the color of dishwater, and I thought of my clerk with the coin and hoped distantly that the odds book had a rule for this, and put the thought away. She tumbled out of the murk at 2 kilometers, then one pearl flank banner mast, pearl flank again, around and around, with the gravel scars across her flanks showing dark like whip marks. The most beautiful ship in the harbor turned into the harbor's biggest problem. swinging her 60 meters at the dark. "Lance Junebug," I said. "I'm at 1 kilometer, holding. Sailmaster status." His voice came back level as a tabletop. "Captain Harker, cab integrity holds. Drive is gone, your assessment was correct. Restart attempts have fouled the chamber." I am the first hesitation I'd ever heard in him. One beat. "Informed by reach control that you have declared a tow approach. I have not flagged distress, Captain." I heard. "I'm not answering a distress flag. I'm a tug on a working day, and you're in my lane, tumbling. Moving you is housekeeping," the carrier hissed. When his voice came back, something in its grain had changed, and to this day I believe I heard the exact moment the doctrine cracked. Not under shame, the way his guild always feared it would, but under the gentler thing, the thing he hadn't been able to name in the hangar and I hadn't either, which was the discovery that the scrap heap's whole way of being in the world had been built, rivet by rivet, patch by patch, for the single purpose of arriving at this hour, and that nothing in 9 years of banners had been built for it at all. "Understood, Junebug," said the champion of Cantilever Reach very quietly, watching the work boot come for him through the dust. "The lane is yours. Instructions. Secure everything that swings," I said. "Strap in, helmet on, hands off the board, and Sailmaster, this will not be graceful. Grace is for fair weather." "So I am learning, Captain," he said. "So I am learning. A tumble recovery has 4 movements, and every one of them has killed somebody I drank with. The first is the dance. You can't grapple a tumbling hull from outside the tumble. The swing will tear the cable out of your saddle or tear the saddle out of your spine. You have to join it. You bring your tug into a match rotation, nose to her center of mass, falling around her axis like a moon around a bad planet, until the two of you are spinning together and she hangs in your forward screen almost still, with the whole drift wheeling behind her. It is the strangest flying there is. Your inner ear says you're in a barrel going over a falls. Your eyes say you're parked. Your instruments say both, alternating. Young pilots train for it in simulators, and the simulators are a lie because the simulator can't do the dust. The dust was doing 900 grains a second against my screen by then. The wiper kept the center clear in slow, patient strokes, smear, clean, smear, clean. And I flew the dance through that little fan of visibility, hands light on the sticks, 11 minutes of letting the Junebug remember. She remembered. She always remembers. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized the lance had gone still in my screen, pearl flank holding steady at 40 meters, the gravel scars right there in front of me like the lines on a palm. And behind her, through the murk, the whole sky turning. "Junebug is matched," I said, going to the saddle. "The second movement is the catch." The Junebug's manipulator arm walked the tow cable out across the gap with its grip light on the messenger line, the little arm, original to the vessel. And I will pause here to repeat that phrase one more time for everyone at the Reach Academy. Original to the vessel, fitted 41 years ago, because the people who built her had been towing things out of weather since before your harbor grew its first hull, and they knew exactly what she was for. The cable's end found the Lance's dorsal mast mount, the banner mast, the only hard point on that whole seamless ship, the one place an Uvan hull of the line will consent to be touched, and seated home with a clunk I felt through my bones in 30 years of doing this. "Captain," Orenthal said, while the latch confirmed, and his voice had a strange small note in it. "You are aware of what that mount carries. Your banners. I'll be gentle with them. You misunderstand me. The mast mount is rated for silk, Captain, for ceremony. No hull of the line as ever." He stopped and made the sound Uvan make instead of laughing when nothing is funny, a single flat chime. 9 years I have flown her, and the only fitting on my ship strong enough to save my life is the one we use for flags. Then your shipwrights were better than your doctrine, I said. Most are. Stand by for spin down. The third movement is the marriage, and it's the one that breaks tugs. You can't just halt a tumble. 60 meters of dead hull carries angular momentum that has to go somewhere, and the only somewhere is through the cable, through the saddle, through the Junebug's spine. And outer thrusters, a few degrees a minute, patience against physics. Too fast and the cable parts and takes a piece of somebody with it. Too slow and the shear wall ends the argument for you. I had told Orenthal 5 hours at the start. The dance and the catch had spent 90 minutes of it, and the wall's gradient was already standing my hackles up. That faint wrongness in the trim, the ship pulling like a boat in a current that isn't on the surface. I ran the spin down at the edge of the cable's rating for 2 hours and 11 minutes, the Junebug's frame drumming, the saddle singing its flat song, Hen's new bearing holding sweet and true the whole way, and I thought of him standing in the work lamp saying he was not a fool with money. Degree by degree, the wheeling sky behind the Lance slowed. The two ships came out of their spin married, nose to mast, dead level in the murk, and for a moment the storm around us went almost quiet, the way blooms do when they're deciding something. Tumble is 0, I said. Sailmaster, how's your cab? Intact. Your cable made some remarkable sounds. It does that. It's never lied to me yet. That, said Orenthal, appears to be the operating principle of your entire vessel. And that, for the record, is the first joke a sailmaster of the Korean Spire Guild ever made about my ship from the inside of my tow cable, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. The fourth movement is the haul, and the haul was the narrows. And the narrows do not get smaller because you're towing. Here is the geometry they showed at the inquiry, with diagrams, to 4,000 people who by then knew it by heart. A tug rated for her own mass plus a barge hauling a hull half again her tonnage, dead weight. No shields on the load out of a gravity gradient, upstream through a Class 4 bloom, with 1,100 kilometers of the worst water in the sector between her and the open throat, and Pelham Gate another 19 hours past that. The Junebug's drive had spent 41 years being adequate. Nobody ever called her quick. But tugs aren't built to be quick. They're built to pull, and pulling is a different number, a number the Reach had never once thought to put on their gallery's boards next to acceleration and trim, and the Bloom was about to host the public reading of it. I laid my course out loud on the open channel, because Orenthal was blind in the bow and a blind man in your tow deserves to hear the road. The eddy line at 1/3 power, nose quartered into the sheer, let the wall's own gradient sling the pair of us along its face the way you'd walk a heavy dog past a fence it hates. Never fighting it square, stealing from it sideways, a few degrees at a time. Through the gravel field's tail in the lee of the big fragment, low and slow, the Lance's scarred flank taking nothing further that mattered. Out across the channel's heart on my ridge, my own ridge, the clean flow behind the comet line that isn't on any chart, with the dead champion's hull riding behind me through the smooth like a barge on a canal. It took 11 hours. I talked him through every one of them, hold points and current sets, and why the cable sings flat and cross shear and sharp in line pull, and he asked questions, real ones, working questions, the questions of a man rebuilding his entire understanding of his road from the floor up at 300 words a minute. Somewhere around the 8th hour I realized what was actually happening on that channel, because the assessor buoys were carrying all of it lived to the Reach. The finest pilot the harbor ever grew, sitting dead stick in a tow cable, conducting the first weather-flying seminar in Uvan history, with the scrap heap as the lectern and 4,000 people taking notes. Captain, he said, in the 10th hour out of nowhere in particular, the wager. At the Reach I offered you 10 hours of margin as a courtesy. I believed I was being generous to a man who could not finish at all. I remember it. I have been doing the arithmetic to pass the time. A pause. The cable sang flat across a shear set, and I corrected, and he waited for it the way my hands waited, which told me how hard he'd been studying. With the dance, the catch, the spin down, and a tow at 1/3 power. Captain, even now, even hauling me, your gate time beats my best projection for the Lance's run by some hours. I have checked it 4 times. I keep arriving at the same indignity. Weather road, I said. Fast as whoever's still moving. Yes, he said slowly, like a man fitting the last bearing into a rebuild. Yes, that is the whole of it, isn't it? I have spent 9 years training to be fast, and you have spent 30 becoming impossible to stop. I let the cable answer that one. It sang sharp and true, line pull, all the way out of the narrows. We cleared the mouth at hour 71. The back throat had blown itself calm behind the Bloom's main body, the way it does, and the last 19 hours ran smooth as a canal, dust thinning, stars coming back rinsed and clean, and at hour 90, with the whole channel watching and not one soul laughing, the orbital tug Junebug crossed the line at Pelham Gate at 1/3 power, on a working day, towing the Lance of the 10th wind home behind her by the flagpole. Pelham Gate is not a grand place. It's a toll arch and a customs platform and a fuel depot hung in orbit over a settled moon, with a dozen more settlements scattered down the loop behind it. And on an ordinary working day, there'd be a queue of ore barges and one board, inspector. There was nothing ordinary about that morning. Every hull on the loop that could make orbit had made it. Settler ferries, ore barges, a hospital lighter, 2 school shuttles with their windows packed solid with children's faces, all of them parked in a ragged arc around the gate like a town turned out at a finish line, because the assessor feed had been playing in every settlement kitchen for 4 days. They didn't cheer when we crossed. I've thought about that a lot. The Reach galleries, watching from the other end of the throat, apparently went up like a grain fire, but the loop people, the ones whose insulin rode on what the gate had just witnessed, didn't make a sound on the channel. What they did was worse. If you want to keep your composure at 90 hours without sleep, they lit their docking lights, one hull at a time, all around the arc, the way the river towns back home put lanterns on the porch when a boat comes in out of a storm. I had to wipe my eyes, and I am not ashamed of it. The wiper kept the screen clear, and I had to manage my own. The customs inspector, Human, as it happens, a Pelin woman named Okonkwo, who'd been stamping my manifests for 11 years, came aboard for the formalities while the depot crew took the lance off my saddle. She looked slowly around my cab, at the cracked couch and the blanket and the thermos, exactly as the guild delegation had done 4 days earlier. And then she did the thing they hadn't and put her hand flat on the console, the way you'd pat a horse. Manifestel, she said, all business, voice not entirely level, top drawer, same as always. And that is how, in front of an assessor buoy faithfully logging the formalities for 4,000 spectators, the Morel Drift learned that the Junebug had flown the entire proving run loaded. 12.5 tons of priority freight. The winter's backlogged medical consignment for the loop settlements. Insulin, dialysis filters, vaccine stock, 2 crated incubators for the maternity station on Hale's Landing. Every kilogram of it contracted, sealed, and riding in my hold since the night before the start tone. Because I'd told the whole auction hall the plain truth and they'd laughed at it. I was flying out anyway. The tender was the chance to do my winter run with a paycheck attached. I'd never once considered flying the throat empty, because flying the throat empty would have meant the settlements waited another month. And the whole point of the road is the people at the end of it. Okonkwo stamped the manifest. The stamp went out on the open channel, a small flat clack, and I'm told that at Cantilever Reach the sound landed like a thunderclap. The lance of the 10th Wind had raced unloaded. Of course she had. A proving run is a race. You strip for a race. No one in 9 years of banners would dream of doing otherwise. The scrap heap had given her the head start of half again her own cargo rating, fixed the channel's streetlight, stopped twice to clean her own lungs, turned around, performed an 1100 tow through the Narrows, and crossed first with the medicine aboard. I didn't plan it as a lesson. I have given up explaining that part. It was a working day. But I've come to accept that the most withering thing my species ever says to anybody is also the most ordinary thing we say, and it's some variation of, oh, this is just the job. They brought Orenthal across to the customs platform in the depot's runabout, and the whole arc of hulls watched him do it. He'd had 11 hours in my tow cable to compose what he was going to say, and the Uvain being who they are, I braced for ceremony. 3 meters of sailmaster came across that deck, moving carefully, the way you move after days strapped in a crash couch, and stopped in front of me, and the silver eyes went from my face to the viewport, where the Junebug hung against the toll arch with her saddle empty and her scorch fan catching the depot lights. Captain Harker, he said, in plain trade, not the high dialect, and loud enough for the channel to carry it to both ends of the throat. At Cantilever Reach, I made the harbor a promise. I keep my promises in person. He'd had the depot crew bring his banners across from the lance, 10 of them silk-thin, each with its guild seal, the whole tower of his life in a roll under one long arm, and there on a customs platform at the cheap end of the loop, in front of the school shuttles and the ore barges and the hospital lighter, the champion of Cantilever Reach hauled down his own banner, the 10th one, the highest. The Wind name itself folded it with the particular fold they use for funerals and held it out to me in both hands. The channel had gone so quiet I could hear Okonkwo breathing beside me. The guild's bid is withdrawn, Orenthal said. The Meridian Loop belongs to the man who flew it as it is, instead of the man who flew it as he wished it to be. And this, the banner, level in his hands, not trembling, which cost him something I could see being paid in real time, is yours by the terms I set myself. I was going to make you a story for my banquets, Captain. You are welcome to make me one for yours. Here is where I'm supposed to have said something fine. The channels waited for it. 4,000 Uvan waited for it. I expect the school children in the shuttle windows waited for it. But I've told you from the start what I am, and a man doesn't get to be somebody else at the exact moment it would be convenient. I didn't take the banner. Put it back up, Sailmaster, I said. His frills went flat with shock. The whole platforms did. Captain, the terms were yours, so the mercy can be mine. That squares it. You flew the worst water of your life with no eyes and no training, and your accident report is going to be taught from, and when the cable came across, you took instruction like a professional and never once let your pride near my rigging. That's not a man who needs to lose his name. That's a man who needs about 30 more blooms. I nodded at the folded silk. Besides, my ship's got nowhere to fly a banner. It'd foul the wiper. For 3 full seconds, the sailmaster of the Corian Spire Guild looked at me the way. They'd all looked at the wiper itself, that first morning in the East Hangar, at a thing that would not fit anywhere he kept his ideas. And then Vay Orenthal laughed. Not the chimes down a stairwell laugh, the public one. A short, cracked, entirely unmusical sound that I'd bet my saddle no one at the Reach had ever heard come out of him. The laugh of a man at the bottom of the worst week of his life finding out the floor is solid. 30 more blooms, he repeated. Is that the human unit of forgiveness, Captain? It's the unit of competence. Forgiveness is quicker. Coffee? He drank a cup of my coffee on the customs platform. The channels got that shot too, and the trade slang got another word, because apparently the sailmaster's face on the first swallow registered across the sector as an emotion the Uvain don't have a banner for. He drank the whole cup anyway, out of form, in small disciplined sips, like a man diffusing something. Then the hospital lighter signaled that the incubators were wanted at Hale's Landing by nightfall, because the loop doesn't stop for ceremony, and I had a contract now. The harbor mistress's award notice came through while I was warming the drives. Formal scroll language, seals, the works. Meridian Loop 14 runs a season, medical priority to D. Harker, Soul Trader, Vessel Junebug, Human Registry. At the bottom under the seals, in a hand that had gone stiff and silver like its owner, old Elaine had added a single line outside the form entirely, and the line said, "The Reach has mourned no one. Thank you, Captain." I flew the winter consignment down the loop with the lanterns of 12 settlements coming on one by one ahead of me in the dark, which is the only victory lap a working boat will ever need. And the Lance of the 10th Wind rode home to Cantilever Reach 4 days later on the Guild tender. And what happened when she got there, and what the harbor did next, is the part of this story nobody believes. So naturally, it's the part that's all true. They brought the Lance of the 10th Wind into Cantilever Reach at midday, the tender hauling her slow up the harbor approach, and the whole Reach came out to the galleries to watch. The same galleries, the same food stalls, 4,000 of the same people who had sung her out 2 weeks before. Sen the clerk described it to me afterward, and Hen confirmed every word, because I wasn't there. I was 3 settlements down the loop with a hold full of dialysis filters, which everyone involved agreed was the correct place for me to be. There was no song. That was the thing Sen kept circling back to. The Uvane have a homecoming song for hulls of the line the way they have a song for everything, and the harbor master's office had cued it, and the gallery choirs stood ready, and then the tender came around the approach's buoy, and the Lance swung into the light behind it, and nobody could start. 60 meters of pearl with the gravel scars running her whole flank, dark and crosshatched like whip marks, like handwriting. Her banner mast bare except for the tow shackle still seated on it, because the depot crew at Pellin had left the shackle in place for the haul home, and so the first thing the Reach saw of its flagship was the fitting my cable had lived on. 4,000 people looked at that in silence. Sen said, and the silence had a grain to it, and the grain was not grief, it was reading. An entire harbor reading for the first time, the handwriting the drift had been writing on my hull for 41 years, and understanding in one long midday minute what the scorch fan and the patches and the dent the cameras loved had been trying to tell them since the morning they laughed at it. The juveniles broke it the way juveniles do. Somewhere in the East Gallery, one of the soft-frilled young ones, who'd been lifted up to see the funny human ship 2 weeks earlier, asked, in the carrying voice of children everywhere, whether the Lance would get patches now too, and whether that meant she was finally a real working ship like the Junebug. And the gallery around the child made the strangled sound adults make when a child says the finding of the inquiry 11 days early, and the moment cracked, and the Reach laughed at itself. Not the chimes. The other laugh, the low one, the one I'd heard out of Orenthal in the tow cable. Hen says it rolled around the galleries for a long time, gathering, the sound of a proud people getting the joke at last and discovering the joke was on them and deciding in the Yuvan way, all at once, together, to be improved by it rather than embittered. I have heard humans manage that maybe twice in my life. The Reach did it in an afternoon. Not all of it. Mind. Pride that size doesn't strike its banners in a day, and there was a faction, there's always a faction, a knot of young banner pilots from the racing stables who spent that first week insisting on the channels that the trial proved nothing. A freak season, they said. An anomalous bloom. A lucky tow. The human had 30 years of stolen survey advantage. Fly it again in fair weather and the Lance takes the gate by half a day. And they were right about that last part. For whatever it was worth, which was nothing, because the Meridian Loop is not flown in fair weather, which was the entire lesson. But they were loud, and they had standing, and it was their petition that forced the formal inquiry, which they imagined would vindicate the doctrine, and which instead took the doctrine apart in a white hall in front of seals and elders. So in the end, the scrap heap's stubbornest enemies were the ones who built the courtroom that buried their own case. I've noticed that pattern before. Mockery, given enough rope and a podium, reliably files its own accident report. What broke the faction wasn't the inquiry, though. It was the chase hull. 2 weeks after the gate, with the inquiry pending and the channels still arguing, the guildmasters did something quietly sensible. They assigned an observation vessel to shadow my first full contract run and document, neutrally, what flying the loop in season actually involved. The verity of calm water, a survey-fitted hull of the line, 2 master pilots, 4 recorders, all very proper. A Class 3 was coming through the throat on schedule, mine. The Run the Loops clinics had planned around, and the Verity took station off my quarter at the door, with her recorders running. She lasted 40 minutes, no drama, no wall, nothing for the channels to gasp at. Just the same arithmetic the Lance had met, arriving politely this time. Apertures scouring, intakes wandering hot, shield draw climbing toward the line where prudence lives. Her master did the genuinely professional thing, the thing 9 years of doctrine had never let Orenthal do. He looked at his board, believed it, called me on the open channel, and said the sentence that I'm told is now carved over the door of the Reach Academy's new weather school, though I think they've tidied the grammar. What he said, in plain trade with 4 recorders running, was Junebug Verity, we cannot follow you. Request you proceed. We will document what we can from the comm side, and we request a pause at the Academy's carving leaves out. We request you tell us what it is like in there, Captain. For the record, no one has ever told us what it is like, so I told them. 11 hours through a Class 3 with a hold full of medicine, talking the whole way for their recorders. The cells and the sheets and the rivers. In the dust, the lee behind the third fragment, the 2 songs of the cable, where the road pushes and where it gives, how you breathe at the hold points, all of it, the entire unwritten appendix, 30 years of weathercraft read aloud into the public record at 300 words a minute, while the work got done around the words. I delivered on schedule. The clinics never knew there'd been an event, which is the only review a medical runner ever wants. And the Verity's recorders cut the whole thing together, and the harbor channels ran it uncut, 11 hours of it, and Sen tells me the Reach stayed up for it the way humans stay up for a moon landing, and the racing faction's channel numbers dropped through the floor between dinner and dawn, because you cannot keep calling a thing luck while you are listening to it think out loud. On the next run, the guild asked if their observers could ride aboard. I took 2, a master grower from the shipwright halls and a young pilot from, of all stables, the faction, a banner racer named Iran Veleth, who arrived stiff as a mast and visibly braced for squalor. I put her on the filter racks. The master grower spent the whole transit on his knees in my engine spaces, making the small odd sounds their species makes in chapels. Photographing 41-year-old weld seams, asking permission before he touched things like the Junebug was somebody's grandmother, which by then I suppose she was. The harbor had taken to calling her the grandmother on the channels, and the name stuck, and she's the grandmother from the Reach to Pellin to this day. And Veleth pulled racks and banged them clean against the tow saddle at every hold. Point, and somewhere around the 8th hour, filthy to the elbows, she stopped at the cab door, looked at the wiper going smear, clean against the dishwater light, and stood there a while. It's not a relic at all, she said, mostly to herself in the high dialect, forgetting I'd learned it. Nothing on this vessel is old, it's all just finished. It's the only finished ship I've ever stood inside. Everything we grow is still guessing. I gave her the thermos cap and didn't say anything, because there's nothing a wise man adds to a young pilot mid-sentence with herself. She flew the faction's apology onto the channels personally that same winter, and she flies the Loop's northern legs now, in one of the new hulls with the shutters and the racks and the beautiful pearl wiper, and the racing stables put her record on their posters. Things move quickly when a whole harbor decides at once. The day I came back to Cantilever Reach for the inquiry, I walked up through the east hangar past the public galleries, and the academy docent was there with a new cohort, the same docent, dishwater game as ever, with her juveniles pressed against the viewport glass. The Junebug sat in her old berth between 2 couriers, patched, scorched, dented, her saddle worn shiny, exactly as funny-looking as she had ever been. Not one thing about her had changed. I stopped at the back of the crowd to listen, the way you do, hoping not to be noticed. Observe the welded seams, the docent was saying, and her voice carried just as it had the first morning. The asymmetric patching, the externally mounted manipulator, yes, the little arm, it is original to the vessel, remember that, it will be on your assessment. The abrasion shielding applied by hand, cohort, what are you looking at? And the juveniles who had been drilled sang it back in chorus the way young Uvans sing everything, and what they sang was the new line, the one that's in the curriculum now, the one the inquiry would put under seals 11 days later in the dry language of findings, and it went. A vessel maintained an answer to its road. And what does the road answer to, said the docent. Nothing, sang the cohort joyfully, at the tops of their small voices, frills rippling all down the glass. The road answers to nothing. I'd have stood there longer, but the smallest one at the end of the row spotted me and shrieked the Uvan syllables of "It's the captain" at a pitch that held my hearing like gravel, and I signed 40 assessment workbooks in 11 minutes and was rescued in the end by Old Hen, who waded in with a docking dispute that did not exist and walked me out the freight door with his gray banner swinging. You let that happen on purpose, I said. I am told you fixed a buoy mid-race on purpose, Hen said. We all have our debts to the road, Captain. Yours signed workbooks. Then the White Hall and the questions. They held the inquiry in the White Auction Hall, converted for the proceedings, banners furled, very solemn because the Uvane are a people of process and a hull of the line had nearly been lost. I gave evidence for 2 days. The accident board was 5 elders with frills like frost, and they had the assessor telemetry, my survey records, and the public channel logs, and what they conducted in the end wasn't an inquiry into Orenthal at all. He'd flown the published numbers, and the published numbers were wrong. That finding took an afternoon. What the board actually conducted for a day and a half with growing and visible horror was an inquiry into the numbers. 9 years of force majeure filings. 9 years of a route flown only in fair weather by hulls with no shutters. No filter racks, no hardpoints, and no pilots who had ever seen a bloom from inside. Certified season after season by assessors who banked with the operator. Bulletins written by instruments parked in the calm spots. An appendix that assumed Class 3 because no one had ever survived collecting Class 4 data. And a colonial survey commission, mine, sitting in their own public records the whole time, charting the weather they'd been declaring impassable on a schedule for 30 years in a vessel their own academy used as a cautionary exhibit. The lead elder put the question to me on the second day, formally for the record, and her voice rasped like Elaine Scroll. Captain Harker, in your professional judgment, how long has the throat been flyable in bloom season by a properly built and properly handled vessel? Ma'am, I've never once known it not to be, I said. It's just never been flyable beautifully. That sentence ended up in the board's findings, verbatim, which is the only time I expect to be quoted in an alien government document, and I'd have picked a better sentence if they'd warned me. The findings ran long. The plain trade summary is that the doctrine failed, not the pilot. The guild's hulls were certified for the route's paperwork, rather than the route's weather, and the harbor that had spent 4 days laughing at patches, shutters, filter racks, manual breakers, tow saddles, and one windscreen wiper was instructed, formally, with seals, to go and find out why every single thing it had laughed at existed. The harbor went and found out. That is the part I want to dwell on, because mockery is cheap and everywhere. But what the Uvane did when the bill came is the most honorable thing I ever watched a proud people do. They paid it, all at once, in public, and they paid it the way they do everything, beautifully and completely and slightly too far. The Korean Spire Guild petitioned the Colonial Survey Office for my Class 4 data and bought the full 30-year series at a price that paid off the contract penalties twice over. The Reach Academy struck the Junebug from its cautionary exhibit list and requested, I have the letter framed, permission to bring cohorts aboard the instructional vessel Junebug at her convenience. The harbor's shipwright halls, which had grown nothing but seamless pearl for 9 generations, sent a delegation of master growers to Pelham to study, of all things, my filter racks, and went home and learned how to grow a hull with shutters, with hard points, with serviceable lungs, and the day the first one came out of the berth, I'll admit I sat down, a wiper. They grew at Pearl, of course. It's a beautiful wiper. It's the most beautiful wiper in the spiral arm, and it works, and every new hull of the line carries one now, and not one Uvan in that harbor will ever again need to ask what it's for. The odds book paid out at 80 to 1. The dock clerk with the dishwater frills, whose name is Sen and who is banked, I'm given to understand, roughly 6 years of a clerk's salary, bought into a freight partnership on the loop and flies the fair season legs as my subcontractor, which means the guild's old joke came true with the polarity reversed. The humans fly the blooms and hand out the calm runs. And old Hen, the still air man, the one who rebuilt my winch bearing in the work lamps and was not a fool with money, Hen was summoned before the guild masters, the week the findings published. They'd pulled the maintenance records going back 40 years and found his pattern rebuilds quietly holding half the harbor's working tugs together, the unglamorous hulls, the ones that do the actual lifting. And the guild did the thing the guild had never done in living memory. Gave a wind name to a dockhand. They asked him to choose it himself, which is an honor on top of an honor. He chose Hen of the working day. The masters thought it was humility. Hen told me over the drink I owed him that it was the plain opposite, and his frills rippled the whole way through the telling, and I bought the second round. Which brings me to Orenthal, because everyone always asks about Orenthal. A lesser man would have retired. A worse man would have campaigned against the findings. He had the standing to make the inquiry ugly, and a faction in the guild wanted him to, and he declined so flatly that the faction dissolved by springtime. What the sailmaster of the Korean Spire Guild actually did, 11 days after the findings published, was appear at Pelham Gate in working leathers with no banners at all on his mast, present himself at my loading ramp while the depot crew watched with their mouths open, and formally petition the full wind bow, the deep one, the one they give masters for instruction. 30 more blooms, Captain, he said. Your unit, your count. I am here to begin. I don't run an academy. I run a tug. Yes, he said. That is what I wish to learn. So I took him on, deckhand's wages, and worked him like a deckhand. And the harbor channels could not get enough of it. The champion of cantilever reach in coveralls, pulling filter racks at a hold point and banging them clean against my tow saddle, learning the cable's 2 songs, learning to read the dishwater light, learning to make coffee. He never learned to like it, but he learned to make it properly, which he insists is the more respectable achievement, and I've stopped arguing. He flew his 30 blooms over 2 winters. I never once had to tell him anything twice, which I have told exactly one other pilot in my life. Somewhere in the second winter, the harbor quietly stopped calling him the sailmaster on the channels and started calling him the apprentice, with a particular warmth in the word, because the Uvane had discovered, the whole harbor at once, the way they do everything, that there was a kind of glory in it. Their finest had not been diminished by the scrap heap. He'd been completed by it. The songs they write now have both ships in them. On the day his count came up, Bloom 30, a fat, lazy Class 2, barely worth the name, and he flew the whole approach himself with my hands in my lap. He set the June bug into the lee of the comet line as gently as silk going onto it, mast and shut her down, and sat looking at the dust running soft across the screen. Ask it, I said, because he'd been carrying a question visibly for about 600 hours of flight time. At the start, Orenthal said, before the buoy, before the wall took me. The night before the start tone, when I came to your hangar and offered you the graceful door, you knew even then. I have replayed it. The drift gets a vote. You knew what the throat was going to do to me. You could have let it. The contract would have been yours by forfeit, with no risk, no narrows, no cable. Instead, you raced me honestly, warned me at the wall, turned 11 seconds after my drive died, and gave me back my banner on the platform. I have flown with you 2 winters to be able to ask the question properly, Captain, and I still cannot make the arithmetic close. Why? I drank some coffee while the dust went by. You're still doing race arithmetic, I said. There's no such thing as the other fellow's storm. Sailmaster, there's just the road and who's on it. Everything else is banners. He was quiet for a long time. The wiper went smear, clean, clean. Tug's toe, he said at last, in plain trade, like a man reciting the first line of something he intended to spend the rest of his life on. It's on the registration, I said, and lit the drives, and the 2 of us went home down the working day.